The revolution's begun. The time to stand up has come. We are the rocking of the throne. We are the rocking of the throne.
So I wanted to start just by saying thank you both for coming on. I'm glad this worked. I happened to, during the primary, I was glued to it constantly, and I watched all of those things that were reported in, like, on social media. All, like, if you look at the Democracy Lost, the Election Justice USA report, I swear every one of those things I was paying attention to. Like I remember this woman recorded how her registration was changed. I think that was in Arizona. She said, I've been a registered Democrat all my life. And she filmed herself going in to try to talk to someone, and even had them turn the computer screen around and show her like that it had been changed. And so anyway, I followed all of that. And this is when I really just became so disillusioned with mainstream media, because I thought, well, surely they're going to talk about all this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And it was just unreal, like state by state. If you were watching and paying attention to people reporting, with their phones on Twitter, on Facebook, everywhere, and nothing was being said. I just couldn't believe it. So I'm just so glad that you're speaking out and about what happened there. And I hope it gets more attention.
Thanks. We wouldn't have gotten to the place we're at if it weren't for Lulu and for Len Collins, our lawyer. It was astounding to us when we discovered, when we were told that they had destroyed the ballots. And I mean, that's just part of it. Lulu actually went through much more of an analysis of scanned images, and she did that cumulative vote tally analysis just some weeks, I think, after the election. So, I mean, her work is, I don't quite understand it all, but understand it enough to be quite disturbed, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. I think what was concerning about the results, there were statistical red flags from the beginning when we did a statistical analysis of it, and that led us to want to look at the ballots. The fact that the county was so obstructionist in the process of trying to examine the ballots was another red flag in and of itself. If there was no problem, why couldn't we just go in and look at the ballots and record a video of it so that people could see it and feel comfortable? But there were really obstructions every step of the way. They didn't want us to take any pictures. They didn't want us to take any video. They didn't want to turn over most of the things that we did public records requests for. And then when they did give some information from the initial round of public records requests that I did. And from that, I was able to do a comparison, a detailed comparison between how many people signed in to vote in each precinct and how many votes were reported. And there were very large discrepancies in those totals, over 1,000 ballots.
Yeah, I saw that.
That's huge. That's not...
That was 1,000 ballots district-wide, right?
That was 1,000 ballots, yeah, district-wide, between how many voters signed in and the vote totals that were certified. And you often have, when I talk to election officials, and I do talk to a lot of election officials, you often have small discrepancies. You often have a vote here, 2 votes there, that just somehow can't be reconciled. Maybe somebody forgot to sign into the book. Maybe the scanner, didn't record someone's vote because it was not filled in correctly. These are 1 or 2 votes discrepancies you tend to see on a pretty regular basis. But this was precinct after precinct after precinct where there were 10, 15, 20 vote discrepancies between how many people signed in and the number of votes that were reported. And so, again, that made us very concerned. And ultimately, when we wanted to look at all the ballots, we were unable to do that because, as we all know now, the ballots were destroyed. And what we were shown, these digital images, there's really no way to verify if those digital images of the ballots that we were shown are in fact the ballots that were cast by all of the ballots that were cast by voters. There's no way to verify that now.
It's just so alarming. You know, when I saw this going on, I thought, this is America? This is the country we live in? It was just so shocking. And over again, I'm amazed still how many people I know that are strong Democrats and don't, watch maybe social media. They're only watching, whatever, MSNBC, CNN. And, I've sent out this, the Election Justice USA report so many times I can't count. And just to try to say, hey, take a look at it, to friends. And people just still don't believe that the primary was, I hate to say rigged, but however you want to word it, there were things that weren't right in enough places. I think that's the problem, is you still have this blackout where so many people just don't even believe that it's a problem. So I don't know how we get past that.
Kelley, people are starting to realize that now. And in some of the later polls, you have over 70% of people who are saying they are at least somewhat concerned about elections being hacked. You have a majority of people saying that they, are concerned about election results. So this is something that I have to say we are making progress on. There is a national concern now. And I think the question is what we do with that. Tim's running for office again. You have a lot of new people running for office. You have women now in record numbers across the country running for office. And I think what most of us would like to see is a real effort in the next round of elections to make sure that people who want to vote, who are eligible to vote, are able to vote, and that those votes are counted securely and accurately. And I think that's really what the focus has to be on now. What are the protocols that are going to be in place to make sure that we have as accurate elections as possible and the most participation of eligible people possible?
Right. Well, so that poll, it took me forever to find polling. See, each CFAR item has to have a majority of Americans support it. So it is kind of a left agenda, but it's populist. Anyway, I think if you look at, it's true that more people aren't trusting our elections, but I think they're for different reasons, I would say most, I don't know what to call them, mainstream Democrats, it's because they're concerned that it's Russia. And that's fine. Whatever reason it is that you doubt it, it at least brings more attention to. So I don't want to get too much into the Russia thing, but, I guess we could say at least them pushing that for so long, whether we have, concrete evidence of it or not, at least it's made everybody go, hey, we better look, we better pay attention. So
exactly. If you wanted to argue that, these electronic voting scanning machines, tabulation machines could be manipulated from within, people will roll their eyes. They don't want to hear it. But if you tell them it's the Russians behind it, suddenly you got their attention, I guess.
I got to tell you, when I was at the Unrig Summit, it was a little weird. Everyone I talked to, there was only the one group, Audit Elections USA. You said that was John Brakey, is that his name? That was the only group that knew about Tim's case and the ballot destruction, and really the only people that said anything about the problems within the Democratic primary. I mean, I picked up.
No one else was speaking about it?
Oh, no.
I watched some of that Unrigged Summit because it was, live cast, and I was also a little bit shocked about that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe somebody was somewhere, but I didn't hear it, and it certainly wasn't the focus. I mean, so one morning I picked up a flyer. It's election and what's the group? Election Integrity Caucus. That's them. And it was a guy from Berkeley, and I had seen his flyer that morning, and it talked about we need to get rid of gerrymandering, all these things. Yes, of course we need to do, but it was all completely focused on what the Republicans are doing to suppress voting. And so I was a little surprised at that. And I sat down in this lobby to charge my phone and get a cup of coffee, and I sit down and look over, and there's the guy he's got the bag and the t-shirt. And I said, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions?" And I just said, "Why don't you have anything on here about the Democratic primary and all the irregularities, all the stuff that happened there? And do you know about Tim Canova's case right now?" He didn't know any of it. So I told him, and there was another group. I should have all this in front of me. But they're building some new. Oh, you know what? I will run and get that card in a minute because I wanted to mention to you. That was a guy that also didn't know about your case, but was very interested. But I was really kind of shocked at that whole thing.
Let me ask you, were they, do you know if they were aware of what had happened in New York, where the New York City Board of Elections signed the civil consent decree admitting they had purged 200,000 voters from the list, 120,000 just in Brooklyn, and of course they promised never to do it again, which sounds like one of those sort of Wall Street consent decrees, without a lot of teeth. I just think there should be criminal prosecutions for this kind of stuff.
Yes, it's just shocking. Yeah, you can't just say, "Look it, never going to do that again." But
there may be criminal prosecutions in this case. We are waiting to find out if there's going to be a criminal prosecution.
I constantly just think, can you imagine what would be happening right now if this was if the Republicans had done this? That's what bothers me the most, is just our media ignoring this. And if it were the other side, it would be all that was being talked about.
Well, and it's because the rigging is within the Democratic Party, and the victims are progressives, basically. They're insurgents.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, the corporate-owned media just doesn't want to hear about it.
Right. But he did know the guy, the election integrity, that guy. He knew when I said about Brooklyn. He had heard that in the news, and that was when he kind of, started listening. And I said, well, that's just one instance. Look at this report from Election Justice USA. So I don't know. It was just kind of strange. I just don't think without dealing with this within the Democratic Party, how are we going to fight it every, other places? It's when you've got the corruption within. So
I think, Kelley, what I've found, because I've investigated Russian, I've investigated elections that have been controlled by Republicans and by Democrats, and there are people from both political parties who are using the current situation to their advantage. So I don't think either of the parties has a monopoly on corruption. And what's important is that we do speak out whenever we see corruption, regardless of the party that's involved, whether it's a party that we sympathize with or a party that we disagree with. What we want are even-handed elections. I mean, one of the problems with our elections right now is that they are, in general, administered by partisan election officials. And that's not the case in other major democracies. Most democracies at this point, most of the Western democracies, have established neutral or bipartisan or nonpartisan organizations that administer elections. So that's something that, long-term we want to think about, keep moving toward nonpartisan or transpartisan administration of elections. But there's also, even with the system that we have with partisan administration, we can put checks in place that will try to keep everything on the up and up. So transparency and chain of custody are the main things that we need to really think about when we're thinking about protocols to help us in these situations. Transparency means that everything is open to the public. So for example, if we're doing audits, whether they're risk limiting audits or whether they're 100% hand count audits, the public can come in and watch and observe every part of the process and be confident that those results are as reported. I know in Columbia County, they're doing 100% or modified 100% hand count audits. And that county has about 40,000 active voters on average. There are many, many counties across the country that are small counties like that, that could right away this year start doing 100% hand counts pretty comfortably. It's just not hard. There aren't any new laws that need to be passed in order to do that. And it's just a matter of people putting pressure on their election officials, and the election officials finding the either paid personnel or volunteers to do those hand counts. And there's other techniques that are being developed, like slideshow audits, where a ballot is projected very large on the wall and everyone in the room can see it. And that makes the auditing process more transparent, and it makes it go much more quickly, actually. And I have a video piece coming out demonstrating these different auditing techniques. So you can look out for that. That's going to be at alternate.org. There's groups now that are working, like secureourvote.us is a group that is working to get people involved with their election officials across the country to try to implement risk limiting audits or, 100% hand count audits, to get paper ballots and audits in place so that we can really start having more confidence in the results. And then chain of custody is the other thing that we really want to be looking at. And that's something that was really lacking in Tim's case. I mean, Tim, do you want to talk about all of the problems with the chain of custody there in Broward County?
Lulu, I think you just know it so much better than I do, the details of it.
We don't have confidence at every step that the ballots were handled securely. I mean, just the fact that they had the ballots scanned by this group, Clear Ballot. They hired Clear Ballot to scan all these ballots. So right there, you have an outside group handling all of the ballots and scanning them. You already don't have chain of custody anymore. You don't know who's handling the ballots. You don't know who's adding ballots, taking out ballots, because ballots need to be under bipartisan or transpartisan supervision at all times. Right. From the moment that they're cast all the way through the moment that they're counted, and then they need to be sealed and not opened unless it's with bipartisan or transpartisan supervision. So, and there's another lawsuit in Broward County that they're counting absentee ballots without a bipartisan canvassing board. They're watching as the ballots are opened. So everything needs to be with a bipartisan or transpartisan supervision. And that's how we have secure chain of custody.
And you just reminded me of another quirk or concern in our case, which was when you first put in the first of the 3 public records requests, you were told by the Supervisor of Elections office that they did not do any scanned imaging in our race. And, a year later, basically, when it's finally time to inspect the paper ballots, because they didn't do any scanned images, we show up only to find out they destroyed all the paper ballots. I guess we found that out a few days later. But suddenly they did have scanned images, and they had brought in Clear Ballot only days earlier to scan the paper ballots that had been destroyed. It's very fishy.
Right, there definitely was misinformation there. They were telling us that there were no scanned. We wanted to see digital images of all the ballots to start off with. We thought that's a good way for us to look at all of the ballots efficiently. And that is something that people can be asking their election officials for, doing public records requests for digital ballot images. That's another great technique for to try to get transparency with the counts. So we did ask for that, for digital ballot images. We were told they didn't exist. A year later, all of a sudden, magic presto, they did exist. So there was a lot of duplicitous information there, things that we did not seem to be getting the truth from the county. And that is definitely a problem.
Right. And I was trying to find the article. I think it was in the Miami Herald. I'm sure you know of this one, Tim, but where it was kind of a smear piece on you for even saying that, hey, something looks funny here. We need to look into it.
That's right. If you ask the question, you'll be called a conspiracy theorist,
right.
a sore loser, really just for wanting to verify the vote. We had a lot of folks who were concerned that the official results didn't match. And I figured, look, the best way to move on from this is let's verify the vote by inspecting ballots in really, I think we're just talking about a dozen precincts we were looking at. And if they match up, the issue's behind us, and we can just concentrate only on looking forward. And for that, you're right, I got vilified in the local press.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to not really, think there. I don't want to sound like conspiracy theorist, but when you see so many instances of this happening, and then the media is just dismissing it, or I mean, I just applaud you so much for speaking up, because
well, thanks.
a lot of people wouldn't, because of that, because you're going to get smeared. And I don't really understand the journalists writing these things, why they would not want to look into it and see.
The Miami Herald and the Sun Sentinel, the two big papers down here, are parts of the second and third largest newspaper chains in the country. And we've seen this consolidation going on in the mass media business for a while. All the surveys show that journalists feel that they have less and less autonomy. Editors even have less and less autonomy. The news is being dictated by, corporate headquarters. This is like Network, the movie 1976. Is like, finally we're living it for real. So you're right. It's very disappointing that the mainstream media is not reporting what's actually happening, and they're attacking the messenger, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that puts it into context is that what we're taught in school is that U.S. elections are, wonderful, the best democracy in the world. We're taught that we know how to do democracy. We do democracy right. But when you really start looking historically, election fraud has been a part of our elections throughout our history, and a very prominent part, actually. And one of the books that I like to cite about this is a book by, I have it right here, Tracy Campbell, and it's called Deliver the Vote. And that is a wonderful documentation of incident after incident after incident of election fraud throughout our history, starting from the very beginning. In the early days, candidates influenced elections in different ways. They would bring beer and a lot of liquor and stuff and entice people to vote by getting them drunk. And so there were definitely different techniques that really, I haven't seen people doing that in 2016. But there historically have been a lot of different ways to manipulate the vote. There would be large groups of voters carted around to different precincts. Tammany Hall was famous for all kinds of mischief. And I think those things are somewhat known in terms of people's consciousness, but not to the extent. There just have been, actually, when you look at the details, for example, there's one detail in the book, the Massachusetts Constitution, which is one of the oldest constitutions that we have, was never actually ratified, they think, when they go back and look at it. It was supposed to be ratified by a 2/3 vote. And when the votes were actually examined, it looks like the votes were not there. But the Constitution just passed anyway. So historians, when they've gone back and looked at these things, have seen that there have been manipulation of the votes historically. They're not sure now that the Massachusetts Constitution was ever ratified because the votes actually weren't there. So I think one of the things that helps to move this out of the conspiracy theory realm is to just say, this is something that happens historically. There's a lot at stake. People with a lot of power and a lot of money are trying to move these elections in the direction that they want. And if there is room for them to manipulate, if there are weaknesses in the system, they are going to be taken advantage of. That's just human nature. That's just politics. And that's the way it's always been played in this country. And so it's not a conspiracy. It's not, people being paranoid. It's people seeing what's in front of them, which is that things don't look like they've been done correctly according to protocol, and speaking up and saying, I want this to be an election that I can trust. I want to know at the end of the day that whoever voted had a right to vote and that those votes were counted accurately. That's not conspiracy theory. That's people asking for their elections to be accurately, transparently verified. That is what we're asking for. It's totally normal.
You know, conspiracy used to not have such a bad meaning, you can say, a pejorative meaning. You know, during Teddy Roosevelt's time, the whole point of antitrust law was to prevent conspiracies in restraint of trade. You know, in the real world, people understand that conspiracies actually do happen, that people sit down and they plan a course of action together. If the course of action they're planning is an illegal one, then it's an illegal conspiracy. Now, in our case, with the Broward Supervisors of Elections, there certainly seems to be some documentary evidence even that folks in that office were conspiring to destroy ballots. You know, does that make it a conspiracy theory? You know, the press doesn't want to talk about it now. They'd rather go silent than call me names, I guess. When the evidence actually shows, looks like there actually was a conspiracy to break the law in the Broward Supervisor's office.
Well, and in this case, we are getting some really good mainstream press coverage, and that's good to take note of. So I did an article in Alternate, which documented what we had done so far. That information was picked up by Politico, and they did a separate and additional investigation of what happened in Tim's race, and they've done, I think, 3 articles now from Politico following up that Governor Scott is very concerned about what happened in Broward County. They want to know why were the ballots destroyed. So this has been picked up by mainstream press. Christian Science Monitor also did a very good article about what happened and their concerns about it. So we are really getting mainstream press coverage now. And there is, I think, a great deal of concern both in the press and with major political players at the governor's level in Florida about how these ballots were handled in the case of Tim's race.
Well, we're going to have to keep it going, and that's why my goal in interviewing the CFAR candidates is I'm going to follow up and talk with each one about, like, if the district they're running in is in this report from Election Justice USA, that's a start. Like, what happened there? I know in Brooklyn, right, some people stepped down from the Board of Elections after that had happened. So I want to follow up and I think those were very kind of surface level changes that happened in Brooklyn. I don't think that New York has done the kind of digging into the corruption here that we need to do. And there's people here who are pushing for that and pushing for better protocols here. But I think it's terrific that you're talking to candidates, Kelley. Yeah, and I hope that you talk to them specifically. What are their platform positions? Are they supporting good election security protocols, good chain of custody, meaningful audits? Like, there should, I'd love to work with you to develop a checklist, to go down and talk to each candidate. Is this part of their platform? And when they get into office, are they going to follow up with it? Because a lot of times what happens, people get into office and now they're like, oh, well, this is the system that got me elected. I guess it's fine. Right, exactly.
Right? So what we really need is people, once they get into office, to be willing to make those changes and improvements to the process, making it more secure, more reliable, more transparent.
Right. And Lulu's absolutely right. This case in Broward has gotten some attention. It's gotten some good reporting, as Lulu mentioned, but it hasn't really been picked up by the MSNBC and CNN and the bigger newspapers. So there's still a lot of ignorance about it around the country. A lot of people have not heard about this. So I think we need to spread the word. Folks can go to our website. We now have an election integrity link that gives links to Lulu's work and other sources of the fraud in our case, of the destruction in our case. So that's at timcanova.com. And we also put up a petition, and I think we've got several thousand signatures now, demanding a criminal investigation of the New York City Board of Elections for what happened. These civil suits that give you a slap on the wrist, that's just not enough. And if you really want to ferret out what happened, there's nothing like the threat of criminal prosecution to get people to start talking.
So, and I'll give you a few websites for me. The website that I'm working at now is from my film. So my film was called Hollered Back. Hollered Back is a way for me, that's like what democracy is. Democracy is when each of us hollers back. It's not just like one way. It's like when you holler back and participate. So that's hollerback, HOLLERBACK film.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Lulu Friesdat, and it's LULU. Friesdat is FRIESDAT at Lulu Friesdat. And I do have a fundraising link up also at my website. Feel free to support my work, and I'm sure Tim needs support also.
Yeah, timcanova.com. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Kelley.
Okay, thank you guys.
Kelley. Great to see you, Lulu. Thanks.
Great to see you, Tim.
Bye-bye.
Revolt Against Plutocracy won't just be covering the news about the necessary revolution in the United States. Sometimes we'll be making the news. If you want to stay on top of the revolutionary actions and strategies of grassroots, genuine progressives, and our allies, please subscribe to our YouTube channel today.